In this example, we'll use Python in a Jupyter notebook to connect to the MyDataHelps export database and load query results into a pandas data frame, like this. Here's a simple query to load daily steps and resting heart rates for all my participants into a data frame. Using this approach, it takes just a couple minutes to access my data and begin analysis. Here are the steps I'm going to follow. First, I'm going to gather authentication and connection information from MyDataHelps Designer and set up my AWS credentials file. Then I'll use a sample Jupyter notebook to load MyDataHelps data into a data frame. I'm going to get started in MyDataHelps Designer. The Export Explorer is available on the Settings tab. I can write SQL queries here and see the results here. If I want the same experience but using my preferred data science framework, in this case Python, I can gather the instructions that I'll need with the External Connection tab, which is here. The first section, Connection Information, has the configuration strings that I'll need in my Python code. Your export database is hosted using Amazon's Athena database service. We're going to use the Python Boto3 library to connect to AWS Athena and use these strings to set up the Python Boto3 client. The second section, Authentication, has a blue Create Credentials button. Click the button to obtain a set of temporary credentials with an ID, key, and token. These credentials provide access to MyDataHelps for 12 hours. Tomorrow, I can repeat this process to get updated credentials. Following these instructions, I'll copy the ID, key, and token and paste them into my local AWS credentials file. If you're unfamiliar with how the AWS credentials file manages authentication with AWS, there's a useful link here. The credentials file should be in a folder named .aws in your home directory. The file is named credentials without a file extension. If you're already using a credentials file, you can paste the copied profile and append it to your file. But if you're new, paste the profile so that it's the only contents of the file. Now I'll switch to my sample notebook. In this cell, you can see that I've copied the configuration strings from the connection information section in MyDataHelps Designer into Python constants. This cell has sample Python code that uses the Boto3 library configured with the constants above to send a query to AWS and obtain a result. And once I've run these two cells that set up my connection information and the Python function that will interact with Athena, I'm ready to construct a query string and try it out. Here's a first simple demonstration query that pulls all my survey definitions into a data frame. Here's the query that I used in my introduction to gather some Fitbit data. And once I'm in pandas, my data analysis options are pretty limitless, but I'll start small and calculate a mean resting heart rate in steps for a selected participant. There are several Python libraries available to interact with AWS Athena and connect to data in your MyDataHelps export database. If you prefer using ODBC to the Boto3 library, you can set up an ODBC data source and run queries with PyODBC like this. Check out a related video that we've done that explains connecting Tableau to MyDataHelps. That shows setting up an ODBC connection. Now these examples are pretty simple, but the export database contains all my data connected with MyDataHelps, including participant info, survey results, and wearable data. You can learn more about the data export process and watch more tutorials using Python to analyze MyDataHelps using the links on your screen.